Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story.
The first alarm was so sharp, it felt like it cut through the glass around us. I'd been leaning on the railing of the dam's observation deck, watching the spillway foam churn hundreds of feet below, when the control room's calm hum turned electric. Red strobes began pulsing overhead. One alarm became 3, and the steady chatter of technicians collapsed into clipped, urgent calls. I stepped closer to the glass partition between the public deck and the operator's floor. The chief operator, a tall man with a shaved head and radio clipped to his vest, was bent over a console that was spitting out warning tones. "Turbine 2's down," someone called. "Pressure spike in gate 7," another voice shot back. Then a younger tech swiveled in her chair. "Vibration sensors are pegging past limit. Possible structural compromise." I didn't need anyone to say it out loud. Before my brain could remind me I was just here as a civilian consultant, my body was already moving. I shoved the access door open and stepped onto the operations floor. "Hold water flow where it is," I told the chief, voice steady, but loud enough to cut through the noise. "Do not open anything else." He glanced up, eyes narrowing, until recognition flickered. "Who?" "Dana Caldwell," I said quickly. "Former Army Corps emergency response. You've got a level 3 containment breach warning. Get downstream services on radio now." No one argued. The chief barked at a tech to patch into emergency channels, and I grabbed a headset from a wall hook, already scanning the control boards for cascading faults. The dam's entire mood had shifted from tense to razor-focused in under 10 seconds. Just 20 minutes earlier, I'd been stuck on the visitor lounge's leather couch, letting my sister Marissa chip away at me with her usual smirking commentary. "These little disaster prep hobbies of yours," she'd said, swirling her latte, "are adorable, like you're playing commander in some make-believe army." I'd bit back the truth then, that I'd once coordinated live evacuations while artillery cracked the air overhead, because she'd never believed it mattered. Now, from the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of her on the public side of the glass wall, latte gone, phone frozen halfway to her ear. She looked like she was trying to figure out why half a dozen uniformed operators were suddenly glancing at me for instructions. "Confirm bypass channels are stable," I ordered the nearest tech, scanning the vibration readouts. "And somebody tell me if Gate 7's pressure is climbing or dropping." The chief repeated my commands without hesitation. Fingers flew over keyboards, radios crackled with the first reports from downstream fire and rescue. Marissa still hadn't moved, but her expression had changed. She wasn't smirking anymore, and I wasn't here as her little sister with the pretend hero job. I was here to keep this dam standing. Marissa had been holding court at a corner table in the visitor center cafe, angled so she could see anyone worth seeing walk in. She barely looked up when I slid into the chair across from her, still smelling faintly of the concrete and cool metal air in the dam's lower corridors from my early morning tour. "You look tired," she said, thumb flicking across her phone. "What were you doing down there again?" "Oh, right, your little disaster drills." I opened my mouth, but she kept going. "Honestly, Dana, I don't know how you don't get bored. Planning for emergencies that never happen? It's like playing pretend. You should have gone into PR. At least then you'd get to see your work in the news." I sipped my coffee. I'd learned a long time ago that answering her jabs only gave her more ammunition. She dropped her phone on the table, screen lighting up with a preview of some glossy event photo. "Did I tell you about the gala last week? We landed a client who was a total nightmare before I stepped in. Full rebrand, image, message, everything. I even got quoted in Business Weekly." Her voice had that triumphant edge I'd heard all my life. I couldn't stop the flashbacks. Dad introducing her at charity dinners like she'd solved world hunger. Mom talking about her TV segments while my deployments got boiled down too. Dana's still overseas doing her thing. The year she saw me in uniform and called it costume-like, then laughed like it was a harmless joke. Marissa leaned back, crossing her legs. "Remember that one? You got so touchy about it. It's just those hats. They look like something from a movie." I let her hear my chair creak as I shifted, eyes fixed on the cafe's glass wall. A group of school kids in matching shirts shuffled past, their guide pointing toward the spillway overlook. My mind cataloged their route automatically. How far to the nearest exit, which hallway bottlenecked. Old habits, she was still talking. Anyway, the rebrand's huge. We rolled out the new visuals this week, and the client's already seeing engagement double. They're thrilled. Honestly, it's the kind of project that gets you noticed by the big players. The table rattled under my fingertips, just slightly, enough for me to feel it before the coffee rippled in my cup. Marissa didn't notice. They're even considering me for VP of another tremor. This one's strong enough to make the metal napkin holder slide half an inch. My head came up fast. From somewhere deep in the facility, muffled and faint, a siren wailed. Not the public one. This was the internal kind, the kind meant for operators' ears first. I knew that pitch. I scanned the ceiling automatically, picking out the nearest emergency lights, the placement of exit signs. My pulse jumped in that familiar, sharp rhythm it always found when things stopped being routine. Marissa glanced up from her phone. What was that? Probably nothing, I said, standing anyway. The siren cut for a second, then came back louder. Whoever was on the controls had decided it wasn't a fluke. Her brow furrowed, but only briefly. We're in a dam. Of course it makes noises. The floor vibrated again, more like a low, steady hum now, machinery working harder than it should. I looked toward the observation deck doors, already mapping how fast I could get there. Marissa rolled her eyes. You're doing that thing. The scanning thing? Relax, Dana. There's probably a tour group flush with cameras just now, realizing turbines make noise. Maybe she really believed it? Or maybe, like always, she didn't have the frame of reference to feel that tight, hair-raising shift in the air when a facility moved from normal to alert. I leaned on the table, close enough that she had to meet my eyes. Stay here. Don't go wandering, she smirked. What, is this part of your pretend hero routine? The hum under our feet deepened, almost like the building itself was drawing a long breath. I didn't answer her. My focus was already walking me through stairwell access codes and the fastest route to the control tower. Her voice followed me as I turned toward the deck doors. You're unbelievable. It's coffee and conversation, not a war zone. Except, in my gut, it already was. The hum under my feet that morning was nothing compared to the clinking of silverware from that Thanksgiving a few years back. Same family table we'd always gathered around. Same polite smile plastered on my face while Marissa held court. Dad raised his wine glass and leaned back in his chair like a man about to give a keynote. And of course, we have to congratulate Marissa on winning the PR Excellence Award for the entire East Coast Division. Out of hundreds of nominees, everyone clapped like she cured cancer. She beamed, chin tipped just right for the candlelight to catch her cheekbones. I waited for the natural pause, then said, I just got back from a project in Laos. Emergency repair on a hydro dam after the monsoon. We stopped the breach before it hit the villages downstream. Dad smiled politely, the kind of look you give a neighbor showing you vacation pictures you didn't ask for. That's great, honey. He reached for the mashed potatoes and turned back to Marissa. Now, tell them about that celebrity endorsement you landed. And just like that, I was background noise again. When it was time for gifts, Marissa slid 2 bottles of Cabernet across the table, the kind that come in a velvet bag with gold foil on the neck. Limited reserve, she announced, like she'd smuggled them out of Napa herself. Mom gasped like they were crown jewels. I set my gift down in front of them, a framed aerial photo taken from the chopper on my last mission. The floodplain was patchwork green and gold, the water safely redirected, the villages dry. That's the area after we stabilized it, I said. It was completely underwater 3 weeks earlier. Dad nodded, already passing the gravy. Mom barely glanced at it before saying, You know, Dana, I do worry about you being out there all the time. It's not stable. You could be doing something safer, closer to home. Stable? I asked. Mom, we're talking about infrastructure that, if it fails, wipes out entire towns. She waved a hand like she was brushing lint off her sweater. Yes, but there's no guarantee. These jobs come and go. You can't build a life on chaos. Marissa's got a desk, benefits, a clear ladder to climb. That's security. Security for who? I asked. The only reason those villages still exist is because we reinforced that spillway in time. That's lives, Mom. Dad cleared his throat. Speaking of security, did you hear about the new building they're moving her firm into? Corner office, Dana. The conversation pivoted like I'd never opened my mouth. My fork hovered over my plate, but I wasn't hungry anymore. Marissa caught my eye and gave me that faint smirk she always used when she'd won something, only she understood. Maybe next year you'll bring us something we can hang in the living room, she said, sipping her wine. I forced a thin smile. Maybe next year you'll bring something that keeps people alive. The air went still for half a second before Dad chuckled, too loud, and changed the subject to football. By dessert, the photo was propped against the wall by the coat rack, still in its gift bag. Mom was fussing over whether the pie was set in the middle. Marissa was telling Aunt Carol about her latest segment on the morning show, and I was already thinking about my next deployment. Because if there was one thing that table had taught me, it was that they'd never understand what mattered to me, and they didn't want to. The sound of my dad's laugh fading into football commentary dissolved into the heavy rain hammering the roof of the operations trailer. Not the thin tin ping of a summer shower. This was a low, pounding drum roll, steady enough to make the walls vibrate. Inside, the air was thick with body heat, coffee, and damp clothes. Radios hissed constantly, voices layering over each other in English, Spanish, and French. Our maps covered one wall, held down by duct tape and wet fingerprints. I stood in front of them, headset pressed tight to my ear, my other hand tracing a finger along the spillway grid. Gate 4's stuck again, a voice crackled in my ear. Venezuelan accent, one of the damn techs. We're 20 centimeters from overtopping. I didn't look away from the map. Pull the crew from the west berm. I want them on 4 in the next 2 minutes, and reroute inflow through bypass 2 and 3. Buy yourself breathing room. My aide, young kid from the Philippines, scribbled on a pad and relayed the orders. The trailer door banged open, and my commander stepped in, rain pouring off his poncho. They're saying the upstream barrier's flexing, he said. If that goes, we've got a wall of water with our name on it. I tapped the grid where the bypass lines met the auxiliary gates. Not if we bleed off pressure here and here. That buys us 2, maybe 3 hours. He stared at the map, then at me. Do it. The kid was already on the radio, rapid-fire instructions spilling out. I moved to the main console, watching flow numbers shift as the team on the ground yanked open bypass gates. Outside the trailer window, floodlights cut through sheets of rain, catching the movement of crews in bright vests sprinting across the platform. Static broke into the headset. Bypass 3 responding, pressure dropping. Bypass 2 holding steady, another voice chimed in. The commander leaned closer to me. You just saved the upstream wall. Not yet, I said, eyes locked on the numbers. Get those reinforcements in place before that flexing turns into cracking. Half an hour later, the rain hadn't let up, but the data had. The spikes were smoothing out. I could breathe again, not much, but enough to roll my shoulders. The commander clapped a hand on my back. Listen up, he called to the room. Every head turned. The only reason we're not swimming home tonight is because Caldwell here saw the choke points before they became break points. That reroute bought us the time we needed. Remember that. No applause, no cheering. Just a silent, weighty kind of acknowledgement from everyone in the trailer. Eyes met mine, and in each one there was that same look. Respect. Real respect. The kind earned in sweat and mud, not printed on glossy paper. One of the French engineers gave a small nod before turning back to his station. The Venezuelan tech's voice came over the radio again, quieter this time. Good call, Caldwell. It wasn't much, but it was everything. This was my world. No one here cared how I looked in a dress or whether my title fit on a nameplate. Competence was currency, and the only thing that mattered was whether you could deliver when the water was rising. We stayed in that trailer until the sun was just a pale smudge behind the clouds. By then, the upstream wall had been reinforced. The overtopping threat was gone, and the worst of the rain had finally moved on. Crews were packing up gear, boots sloshing through mud that had been water an hour before. I stepped outside, letting the damp air hit me full in the face. The river was still roaring, but it was contained, right where it was supposed to be. The commander joined me, his poncho flapping in the wind. You ever think about taking a desk job? I laughed once. Not in this lifetime. He grinned. Good. We'd be screwed without you out here. That was it. No camera crews, no family to nod politely and change the subject. Just a plain statement from a man who'd seen what happened when people didn't know what they were doing. And I realized, standing ankle-deep in mud with the roar of the spillway in my ears, that I didn't need their applause. Not here. Not ever. The phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back from the stillness of the trailer, where I'd just caught my breath. I didn't need to check it to know who it was. Dana, my mother's voice crackled through before I even answered. I was thinking about the dam, and, maybe it's time to consider a desk job, something more stable. I had no idea why I bothered picking up anymore, but I always did. Maybe some part of me still believed that if I just explained it right, they'd get it. Mom, I'm in the middle of something, I said, tone flat. The last thing I wanted right now was another one of these conversations. I know, but listen, she continued, oblivious to the irritation in my voice. This job, all that field work, it's, how do I put it? Risky. You can't expect us to feel comfortable with you out there, always chasing after danger. Her words hit too close, like a slap in the dark. There was the guilt, the worry, the judgment. I'm not chasing danger, Mom. I'm preventing it. You know, infrastructure failures, broken dams, faulty levees. When they go, they take whole towns with them. I breathed in deep, trying to keep my voice even. But honey, she said, the tone softening, like she was explaining something to a child, we want you to be safe. I could feel the familiar knot tightening in my chest, the kind that came from years of explaining, of trying and failing to make them understand. Safe? I echoed, incredulous. Mom, people don't get to be safe when the infrastructure that keeps them alive falls apart. My job is to make sure they never have to think about it. But if I'm too busy making sure you're comfortable, no one gets saved. Is that what you want from me? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her scrambling for words. I could already picture her face, wrinkling in confusion, trying to grasp the scale of what I was saying. We're just worried, Dana, she finally murmured, her voice heavy with something close to regret. We worry you're out there and no one sees what you're doing. It's just so much for one person. I couldn't breathe through the ache in my chest. How many times had I heard this? I don't need to be seen. The work is enough. I'm saving lives. Her voice softened, a little quieter now, like she was choosing her words carefully. It's not that, honey, but you need to be able to share your work with people, show them what you're doing. You can't just disappear into these projects. It's not healthy. You're never here. You don't even talk to us about it. I clenched my jaw. Mom, my work isn't about showing off. It's about preventing disasters. It's about stopping things before they even start. You wouldn't understand, and I've come to terms with that. I could practically hear her sigh on the other end. I just wish you'd let us understand. I was done. I took a breath, steadying myself. You don't want to understand. You want something that can be photographed and displayed, something that fits your world. But I can't do that, Mom. I can't shrink my work to fit your idea of success. You have to accept that. There was another long pause, and then I heard her voice crack slightly. I just want you to be happy. The anger burned away, leaving only the faint sting of a truth I'd known for years. I am happy, Mom, I whispered, but I'll never be the one you want me to be. And that's fine. Another silence. Longer this time. She finally spoke, but her words felt like a weight in my chest. I know, but I still wish you'd consider settling down. I closed my eyes. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. She didn't say anything to that. I hung up before I could hear her say one last thing I didn't need to hear. Instead, I sat there in the quiet, the hum of the equipment filling the space around me, and let my mind float to a place where the only thing I had to worry about was the job. And when the sun finally dipped low enough to turn the sky outside into steel, I knew with total certainty that my work wasn't about them. It was about the people out there, those I would never meet, who needed to know someone was out there, watching, keeping them safe. The control room felt like it was about to explode. People were shouting, rushing to their stations. I could hear the frantic buzz of radios, the hum of equipment suddenly working overtime, and the pounding of my own heartbeat. I had just crossed the threshold of the door when one of the technicians, a tall guy with a scruffy beard, spotted me. Dana? He asked, his eyes widening. Shit, is that you? I nodded, already scanning the room for where I could be most useful. There were a half-dozen operators scrambling, some of them with their backs turned to the chaos, others facing the glowing data boards. But I didn't need to wait for permission. I didn't need to be introduced. I was here to fix this, not explain who I was. Gate status? I barked, stepping toward the nearest operator. The tech, a young woman, glanced up. Gate 2's closed, but vibration readings are spiking again. Turbine failures escalating. She looked almost guilty, like she should have done something sooner. I didn't have time to coddle anyone right now. Get it back open now, I said, already stepping toward the board. Bypass channels? Another tech, already sweating, grabbed the comms mic. Bypass 2's still good, but we're running low on bypass 4. I didn't even glance back at them as I took control. Hold bypass 4 where it is, channel all backup flow to 2 and 3. If we can't release pressure at the gates, it's going to breach upstream, and that's when we start losing towns. They were already following the orders. I could feel the collective sigh of relief from the room, even as the chaos swirled around us. For a moment, everything slowed. This was my world. This was what I was trained for. Not the office desks or the PR meetings my family always raved about. This was the moment. The chief operator, he was the one who'd been frozen in place just a minute ago, finally straightened up, adjusting his headset and stepping toward me. He was an older guy, grizzled from years on the job, but I could see the relief in his eyes as he passed me a clipboard. "Looks like you've got it," he said, his voice quieter now. "We were just about to call a full evacuation, but Don't. Not yet," I interrupted, grabbing the clipboard and scanning the data. "We've got an hour, maybe 2, depending on how quickly we can stabilize the downstream flows." "Understood." He looked around the room, eyes catching the others. "Okay, people, you heard her. Let's move." I didn't waste time looking around at the others as they scrambled to carry out orders. My mind was already ticking through the next steps. I needed to check in on the downstream status, confirm the evacuation protocols were up to date, and adjust the flow at bypass 4 before we lost the pressure again. I could feel the weight of every second that passed. This was it. No more talk, no more polite nods. It was just the numbers, the people, and the situation we were in. Outside the glass partition, Marissa had stopped pacing and was staring into the room. She had her phone in her hand, but she wasn't texting. Her lips were pressed together, eyes wide, as if she had suddenly realized that she wasn't in control anymore. I didn't look at her, not yet, but I could feel her watching me, and it only reinforced everything I already knew. This wasn't the world she understood. It wasn't the one she cared about. A tech, this time from the communications desk, leaned toward me. "Evacuation orders are ready. We can push them downstream once we confirm the flow stabilizes. Hold them for now. Keep monitoring, but don't trigger the sirens unless we need them," I said, my voice sharp, clear. "I need an updated pressure report every 10 minutes. Let's not flood the town until we have no choice." "Understood." The tech tapped away at his console. I stepped back to the central station, looking over everything once again. Data was flowing in, the bypasses were stable for the moment, but I wasn't done yet. The next set of orders needed to go out, quickly, without hesitation. If we didn't act now, we were going to be buried under the weight of the dam. I scanned the room. The operators had all settled into their tasks, their nerves replaced with focus. The chief operator caught my eye and nodded, and I felt the smallest sense of pride that didn't need words. But it wasn't enough. We still had to make sure the public was safe. "Call the evacuation centers," I said, turning to the nearest tech, "and prepare for a full public announcement." The tech hit a few buttons. "On it." "Wait," I said before he could leave the station. "How's Marissa handling the public on her side?" I didn't know why I asked it. Part of me was just curious to see if she was still out there, still floating around in her safe little bubble. Another part just wanted her to understand that I was doing something real. The tech hesitated before looking up. "She's still in the observation area, but it's like she doesn't know what to do." I sighed, eyes flicking to the partition. I could see her still standing there. She was holding her phone like a lifeline, probably hoping she wouldn't have to be a part of this mess. But she was, and she wasn't going to get away without realizing that I was the one who could make the difference today. I moved toward the PA system, took a deep breath, and pressed the button. "Attention all personnel and visitors. This is Dana Caldwell, Federal Emergency Infrastructure Consultant. We are currently dealing with a turbine breach and high water pressure levels. Please remain calm and stay clear of the spillway area. Evacuation procedures are underway for downstream areas. Further updates will follow shortly." I paused for a second, then added, "I'm in charge of the ongoing operation. Thank you for your cooperation." I let go of the button and glanced out of the corner of my eye. Marissa's gaze was locked on me through the glass, her mouth open in shock. Good. She was listening now. The PA system buzzed again, this time cutting through the hum of tension that had thickened in the control room. I had just given orders for another round of flow checks when the loudspeaker crackled in my ear. "Dana Caldwell, please report to the PA system immediately." I pushed through the growing knot of techs and operators, my boots clicking sharply on the floor. The weight of the headset felt heavier as I walked past the glass walls where Marissa stood. Her arms were crossed, mouth a thin line as she stared back into the room, not a single word escaping her. The once polished confidence I used to envy was gone. Now, her confusion was on display for everyone to see. I stopped in front of the PA system, hands steady despite the chaos still vibrating under my feet. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the button, feeling the pulse of power through the room. "This is Dana Caldwell," my voice boomed, calm and authoritative. "I'm the Federal Emergency Infrastructure Consultant overseeing this operation. There's been a turbine breach. While there is no structural failure at this time, we are currently performing a controlled water release to relieve pressure." The words fell from me, measured and deliberate. No hesitation, no doubt. "Evacuations are underway for the affected downstream areas. Please remain clear of the spillway and follow the evacuation instructions you've received. We will continue to update you as necessary." I took a moment before adding, "Stay calm, we've got this." I let go of the mic button and stood there for a beat, feeling the weight of my words settle into the room. Outside, through the glass, I could see Marissa's expression shift. I could see the confusion crack open, a tiny fracture in her perfect image. She wasn't smirking anymore. Her eyes darted across the control room, her mind trying to keep up with what was happening. She was seeing what I had been trying to tell her for years. This was my world. I glanced around the control room. The staff was listening, the tension lifting. People were already falling into rhythm, checking in with the comms team, reaffirming the evacuation points. The chief operator caught my eye and nodded once. He wasn't saying anything, but I didn't need him to. The loudspeaker buzzed again. "Dana, we need an update on the status of Bypass 2. I strode back to the main console, hands moving over the buttons and levers, confirming the bypass and gate statuses. A few minutes passed before I had confirmation that pressure had dropped. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to stabilize the immediate danger. We still had a lot to work through, but we had the time to manage it now. My comms tech looked up. "Evacuation centers are reporting good compliance. Downstream traffic's clearing up, but we need more buses for evacuation routes?" I nodded. "Send the trucks. Don't wait." There was no room for hesitation. My eyes flicked toward the window again. Marissa was still standing in the observation deck, but now she wasn't just watching. She was seeing. She didn't look proud or smug. She looked small, like she'd been caught off guard by something she couldn't quite comprehend. And for the first time today, I allowed myself to feel a strange kind of satisfaction. It wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about her realizing the kind of work I did and how it mattered. I kept my focus on the task at hand. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about family dynamics. It was about people's lives, and my job was to ensure they stayed safe. The moment I allowed myself to get caught up in anyone's perception, it would cost lives. "Dana, we've got confirmation on the downstream dams. All bypasses are steady," my comms tech reported. "Good," I said, even as my mind whirred through the next steps. The pressure was coming down, but there was no guarantee that we wouldn't have to release more water, more quickly, if the next phase of flow calculations came back too high. I needed to watch the entire picture and act on it before it escalated again. Marissa's voice from outside the control room caught my ear, thin and hesitant, though I couldn't quite make out the words. I turned away from the panel, moving toward the glass. She was talking to someone in the control room now, one of the operators who had just updated me on the pressure stats. I could see it, the way her posture had shifted, how she was trying to be part of this world now, as if the past few hours of nonstop action had somehow rewritten the way she saw me. But I wasn't interested in giving her a moment of validation. This wasn't about making her understand me. This was about making sure we held it together long enough to stabilize the dam, to get people evacuated to protect this region from the worst. I turned my attention back to the radio. More updates. We were still in the thick of it, and I had no time to waste. "Dana," the chief operator called from across the room, "we're good on bypass 2, but we need to start releasing water from the upper gates to prevent a backup at the basin." I acknowledged him with a short nod. The numbers were looking better, but the last thing I wanted was another setback. "Set the upper gates at 20%. Let's play it safe." He moved into action without hesitation, and I stayed at the console, eyes darting between screens, making sure the entire system was moving smoothly. Then the technician next to me, a young guy with dark circles under his eyes, glanced at me. "How's it feel? You in charge now." I didn't look at him. Feels like every other day in the field. Just gotta keep the ship steady. The room stayed focused. For now, the worst was over, but the job wasn't done. And I wasn't about to relax until we were sure the dam and everyone downstream were safe. Marissa still stood behind the glass, still in her corner, still watching. But now she wasn't just observing. Now she was learning. I didn't stop moving when I stepped back into the control room. The air felt heavier now, more charged, and the sound of rushing footsteps and distant radio chatter filled my head. The data was still flowing, steady, but we weren't out of the woods yet. Dana, the chief operator called, his voice sounding like a distant relief. We're good on bypasses, pressure's steady. Looks like we're holding. Not good enough, I muttered under my breath, though I didn't let the frustration show. My eyes were locked on the control panels, flicking between the flow rates and the pressure gauges. Open gate 4, 10% more, and make sure the backup flows are redirected to bypass 3. I could feel the room quiet, the operators listening, processing. The hum of the machinery felt more like a heartbeat now, rhythmic, steady, no alarms blaring. Yet, got it, one of the younger techs said, tapping into the console. Don't got it, me, I snapped. I want confirmation every minute. One hiccup, and we're dealing with a full breach. There was no time for mistakes. Not now. Not after everything we'd already been through. We had to hold the line. Evacuation? The question came from the communications desk, a voice I didn't recognize, but that didn't matter. Hold for now, I answered, voice clear, the authority in my tone firm but controlled. We're managing the pressure. I'm not calling evacuation until we're sure. No more panic than we need. The voice on the comms clicked in agreement. Understood. I couldn't look away from the screens. The pressure had started to drop, but it was delicate. Everything depended on small margins, small decisions, small adjustments. The numbers weren't perfect, but they were moving in the right direction. Dana, the chief operator called again, quieter this time, almost hesitant. He had his eyes fixed on the incoming data as I did, but his tone told me he needed to say something. We've got a good grip on this, but you know as well as I do, things can shift fast. Yeah, I know, I replied, not looking at him. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. There was a weight in the air between us now, a kind of understanding that we were just riding the edge of control. And if we lose it, we take the hit, but we don't lose it. The chief nodded, and we both turned back to the control panels. Outside, I noticed Marissa again. She hadn't moved from the observation gallery, her posture rigid, her face tight. She was still watching, still standing there like she wasn't sure how to react. She hadn't expected any of this, didn't understand it. I didn't want to look at her, not now, not after everything she'd said to me. But it was impossible to ignore. She was there, looking in, and for a second, I wondered if she was finally seeing it, the magnitude of what I did, how real this work was. But it wasn't for her. I wasn't doing this for her approval or her praise. I was doing it because someone had to. Someone who knew what the hell they were doing. Someone who could make a difference. Dana, a voice interrupted my thoughts. It was the comms tech again, her face lit up with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Pressure's stable, water's flowing through without overloading the system. Good, I said, giving her a nod of approval. I moved toward the nearest operator to check on the readings, verifying everything myself. The pressure was dropping, but we weren't clear yet. Not until we'd controlled every risk. Dana, the chief operator said one last time, voice quieter, almost like he didn't want to disrupt the silence that had settled over the room. I turned to him. I think we're good here, he said, a rare flicker of respect in his eyes. You've got it. Whatever happens now, it's on us to make sure we stay ahead. I nodded, more to myself than to him. Keep monitoring. If the readings spike again, we adjust. Don't let anyone get complacent. He didn't argue. There was nothing else to say. The room had quieted down, the chaos becoming a muted backdrop to the sound of steady work. I glanced back outside the control room, through the thick glass. Marissa hadn't moved an inch. She was still watching. But now, her eyes weren't just filled with confusion. There was something else there, something I couldn't quite place. For the first time, I let myself meet her gaze. I didn't look away, didn't shrink. I didn't need to. I wasn't here for her. I was here to do my job. I didn't wait for her to process it. She was still out there, watching through a glass wall, while I was in here, doing what mattered. The final adjustments were made, the last communication sent to evacuation teams downstream, and the dam's pressure levels had dropped enough to ease the tension in the room. I took a moment to let the adrenaline subside, watching as the operators relaxed, shifting their focus from chaos to routine. The immediate danger was over. Outside the glass, Marissa stood alone. I saw her staring at me, her posture stiff. I couldn't tell if she was still processing what had just happened or if she was just trying to figure out how to react. For the first time, I didn't care what she thought. "Dana," the chief operator said, his voice quieter now, "you're going to be here for the debrief, right?" I glanced around the room at the staff, all of them giving me looks that range from respect to admiration. "I'll be there, but there's still work to be done." I walked past the control room, letting my eyes flick back to the observation gallery. Marissa's gaze met mine again. There was something different in it now. Something closer to understanding, maybe even awe. But I wasn't here for that. I wasn't here for her. I was here to do the job, and I had done it. As I left the control tower, I could hear the faint hum of voices from the State Emergency Board, who had been waiting for my report. The service deck was just ahead, the air thick with the humidity from the damp concrete. The officials greeted me with nods and quick handshakes as I moved toward the briefing area. My mind was still running on the technicalities of the operation. "We'll need to go through the details of the controlled release," one of them said. Pressure in the bypass was borderline. I nodded, already pulling up the data on my tablet. I kept the flow steady until we had a solid reading from the downstream teams. The priority was always minimizing collateral damage. Evacuation procedures were only triggered after the pressure plateaued. We didn't need mass panic. The controlled release was key to ensuring that. They scribbled notes, and I spoke with the same level of clarity and precision I had used in the tower. I'd been trained to handle these situations, to keep a level head when everyone else was looking to me for answers. When the debrief ended, I stepped away from the table, knowing the immediate threat had passed. But it wasn't over. There were still formal reports to submit, more data to analyze. It was just the beginning. As I walked past the service deck, I saw Marissa again. This time, she wasn't with the crowd of visitors. She was standing alone, her posture deflated. Her usual confidence had evaporated, replaced with a quiet uncertainty. She stepped forward, hesitated, then walked toward me. I didn't move. I didn't need to. She stopped just short of me, her eyes searching mine for something. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quiet, almost tentative. I didn't understand what you do." I nodded, not saying anything. There was no need for more words. She looked down, as if considering what to say next. I was wrong. I waited, but didn't prompt her for more. Her gaze flicked up to meet mine. "You were right. I was so caught up in my world that I couldn't see yours. I never gave you credit for what you do, for how important it is." I let her words sink in, but I didn't react. The apology felt like a formality now. Too little, too late. "Thank you," I said simply. "I appreciate it." And that was it. She stood there for a second longer, as if expecting me to say more. But I didn't. I didn't need to. Marissa had apologized, and that was the last time I'd ever need her approval. I turned and walked away, heading back toward the briefing room, knowing that the work was still far from finished. But this was my world now, not the one my family saw, not the one they wanted me to fit into, the one where competence mattered, where results mattered, and I was the one who had made it happen,